content is created for the internet. Art is created for life. And I think art can definitely be shown through content, but I don't necessarily think content is necessarily art.
Take a little break from the crazy, try to recalibrate. Every day seem to be hazy, I see doom. Everybody sick with obsession, it's hard to navigate. Take your baggage out of my space, I need room. Reset. New world order. Reset. New world order.
Okay, we alive. Thank you for tuning in to all of the folks who are listening right now. My name is JP Reynolds. I'm the host of the Stir Crazy podcast, where I'm talking to some really dope, brilliant, dynamic people. I call these folks movers and shakers in a variety of fields, disciplines, and areas of interest. And I'm very excited tonight for my guest. I am. It's true. I'm very excited because I respect this person's work and this person as a human deeply. And we got billboard energy on the podcast tonight, good people. For the folks listening, we got billboard energy. Okay, I just need y'all to know that. My guest tonight is Melissa Kimble, who is a brilliant creative person. Is an author, a community builder. I see Melissa as a builder. Again, this is Billboard Mel tonight on the podcast. You may have been a part of one of her Twitter chats. You may have gotten some plug information. You may have seen something she created or facilitated or made happen, and you didn't even know she was doing it. She was the one that did it, but she might could have been the one. So we got Melissa here tonight, and I'm grateful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. Yo, I just, want to jump in. Where are you? How are you? Have you been drinking water? What's good?
Yeah, so I'm in Chicago right now. I'll be here for a few more weeks. I'm moving back to Memphis. I'm from Chicago and from Memphis, so I got two hometowns.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a trying year. We lost my dad at the top of the year. So
man.
Hard. Yeah, so I have to drink water or otherwise I will not make it. So yeah, taking it one day at a time, but grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. I'm sorry to hear about the loss. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear about that. But that's a real thing. It's definitely been a year of communal grief and ups and downs, lots of challenges and obstacles that we've all. Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
But thank you for being here and for bringing your energy and your brilliance and your own genius to the table, and for the work you're doing and for just the way you are, right? I mean, you said it just then, right? You are here, and that's really important. And that's I want to honor that and recognize that. And one of the reasons I respect what you do so much is because you hold such significant space in this world that we have right now. And I think especially right now, I mean, even really, especially with the last year, there's been so much created and so much generated from our folk. And I see you as a protector, right? You're a protector of those things we create. You're a facilitator. You're a person who's an encourager, an enabler, right? And, what brought you to the point of making that a thing?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think for me, I went through definitely like a series of different phases. I think over the course of these past, maybe like what years is it? 8, 9? So maybe like 9, almost 10 years really, where I had just kept like running into these roadblocks. Like the first one was, when I graduated from college, I graduated in 2009. And I graduated right when the recession hit. So there was nothing when I graduated college. And you know how I don't want to say like they sold us a dream, but I feel like they kind of sold us a dream. with college, and that post college like life, it was just difficult. I was so down. I had been just depressed and stressed coming out of college, not being able to find anything, and was really working outside of the industry then, like doing a bunch of odd jobs. I was working at FedEx at one point, and I was just really hungry for like stories of people that I was coming across that looked like us, on the internet, who were like doing their own thing and kind of building their own thing outside of, the traditional industry setting. And so I was really hungry for those stories, and I wanted to be a part of telling those stories. And so that was kind of like the first, like that first phase of Black creatives. But as years went on, I had a lot of like shitty jobs and a lot of shitty employers, and just bad experience after bad experience with just trying to work in corporate. Once I had finally gotten my foot in the door, it just kind of felt like, damn, I did all of this to get my foot in the door. And I found out it's basically some bullshit. And so like that last time I was like let go from a job, this was like maybe 2018, like 2017, I had just been let go from one job. 2018, I had got let go from another job. So I was like, you know what? This must not be the path for me, because this is like the third, and a lot of people don't know that, but I've been fired a lot. Like I've been fired and let go a lot. And so at one point I had just got to this phase of like, I don't want to be bothered with corporate anymore. And I just really wanted a space where it felt like I could build with other creatives who were trying to do the same thing, and again, highlight these stories. So a lot of it just really came out of a response of like shitty treatment and wanting more for myself, and feeling like, okay, I know if I feel like I'm destined to do other things and different things, there has to be other people out there who feel the same way, who are looking for, some sort of hope and also some sort of truth. And really all of those things kind of just led into what you see now. And I think the need for what I've built has gotten even deeper, especially over, like you said, this past year, where, we see all these companies and corporations, with the Black squares and Black Lives Matter and all these other different things. And, it's cool for like a summer, but then like when the next year comes and real life is still happening, like, what is that about? And, we just need, and I think if 2020 and 2021 has really driven home any point for me personally and professionally, is that we just need our own spaces, right? Like nobody's going to take care of us like we take care of us, because I mean, you see the world that we live in. But really that's what really led me to create #Black Creatives, was just to give people like us our own space where we can share with each other and help each other and nurture each other. And it has nothing to do with whatever, the trend of the day is. Like collective care is like built into it. So yeah, that's what led me to it.
Yeah, the perspective there is really helpful, and thinking about the value that we create from the things that we are springing forth into the world. And again, like I see you as such a protector, because I think about the space you hold, especially on the internet, right? Like in the internet, the space you hold is constantly calling not only other people to recognize our value from what we create, but also like ourselves, right? It's like, now we're actually worth that check. We are worth that type of communication. We're worth that type of treatment. We're worth better treatment. And that's so important. So thank you for that. And I'm curious as what you think, how you think our world is doing right now, right? Like you mentioned last summer, you mentioned the statements that I'm sure a lot of Black creators were consulted on, and DEI went crazy, and well, which people should we put on the flyer, and what should this word say, and all of that. I'm curious. It's it's March of 2021, right? This is a year later from the pandemic. I'm curious as to where you think we are. How do you think we've done with everything that's transpired?
Ooh, I mean, I personally feel like as a whole and as a society, I don't think we're doing too hot because a lot of I don't know, I just hear a lot of people just talk about how tired they are, how drained they are. Like, what do we reach? Like over almost half a million
Mm,
uh like deaths
yeah.
with COVID. And so I'm like, if and that in my mind, especially someone who's just lost someone, I'm like, okay, that's the count, right? But that's not including the people who love these people,
Mm.
young and old, that have passed. But I think we're doing a terrible job. I feel like we are still in a pandemic, like, and I have to like every now and again even remind myself, like, gee, we're still living in and through a pandemic. And I just feel like still not enough grace has been given on either side for people to just really be able to adjust,
Mm.
breathe, and to rest. Like we keep talking about how everybody is tired and everybody is sad, and yet we keep going like nothing nothing is happening, or like we're living in a normal world. So I feel like we've done a terrible job. And we're continuing to do a terrible job. And then stuff is starting to open back up. But I'm like, we don't even know if the vaccine is it, you know?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I lost a grandmother and a grandfather
Wow.
within a month from the virus, and you're right. I think about the commodification of everything too, and the way words and look, it's like it's sexy now to be, woke, or it's sexy now to be anti Asian hate, or anti-racist. And I'm like, oh man, this is so difficult because now we're just making it sexy. I don't know if we realize that it's complex and that it takes.
It's so complex. It's so complex. And I'm glad you said that because none of this stuff is normal, right? Like the massacre in Atlanta, like just none of this stuff is just normal. And I hate that we live in a country that tries to like go forth as if this stuff is normal
Mm,
when it's not.
yeah, it's definitely not normal. And folks just like to keep moving on. If like to keep moving on. Speaking of moving, I mentioned that you're Billboard Mel, and at the height of the pandemic, really, right? Actually, that was like right when this iteration of the movement kind of got another jolt.
Mhm.
You tweeted something that ended up on a billboard, that this world does not move without Black creativity. And I mean, I think about that in so many different contexts because that's such a powerful statement. But like at the height of the pandemic, I'm thinking about, or the height of this iteration of the movement, I'm thinking specifically about all those statements that people were making, and campaign ambassadors, and making stuff look away. And contextually speaking, what do you think it is? Because human creativity is also a very powerful thing. Like human creativity across the board, it's incredibly moving, right? But then, I think about the movements, I think about the way the folk do it. And I'm like, what do you think is particularly special and powerful about Black creativity?
Yeah. Nah, that's a really good question. I mean, for us, it just specifically for at least for me, like Black creativity is something that just really comes from the heart and from our souls. And I don't want to say that non-Black people don't have any soul or don't have any heart, but I just feel like with Black creativity specifically, like it's just one of those things that everybody feels, even if you don't understand it, even if you hate it, you still feel it.
Mm,
And there's just something special about that. I think not saying that like we take it for granted because we are Black people, but I just think it's just something special about, especially a people that's had to go through as much as we've had to go through, and that we're still going through, and the fact that there's something in us that still can create and still can make impact and make waves the way we make impact and make waves. And it's just because you can feel it. And I feel like also too, like Black creativity is just so timeless. Like at any, you look at any era, especially recently, like in recent history. But if you look at any era, like you can always connect something back to Black folks and how we do stuff. And we're just the originators of rhythm and of soul, and just certain things you just can't touch and you can't mess with. And I feel like no matter what happens to us in this world, you can't take that away. Like I could imagine this. Sometimes I think this world doesn't even deserve Black people for as much as we give it. But yeah, I just think that's what it comes down to, like being able to feel it. Like you just feel us, even if you don't like us, even if you hate us, you feel them.
Because we know that's the thing. Folks love Black creativity. Folks love Black culture. They don't love Black people all the time.
Right?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's definitely a thing. Is there anything you feeling these days? I'm thinking about this. I'm curious as to what, if anything's moving you, if you're feeling anything these days.
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, not too much. Only because I feel like I'm still grieving, and so there's not a lot that I'm either paying attention to or tapped into at the moment. So I said that to say that it's not because I'm not feeling anybody. I just think like the space that I'm in right now, kind of hard for me to engage with a lot of new things in this process. And I know like it'll change, after a while. But right now I feel like I'm watching a lot of the same like stuff. I think I was told early on to like watch like favorite shows and stuff like that. And so for me, I love music documentaries. Like Sarita tell you, I watch Can't Stop, Won't Stop, and the Defiant Ones like a nut for some reason. I just watch like the Quincy doc or Ruth Carter's episode on Abstract, Toni Morrison's doc, like stuff like that has been bringing me a lot of comfort. And I watch stuff like that over and over again, especially because it's Toni Morrison,
The GOAT, Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
Now, it's actually interesting. I'm glad you said that and that you responded like that, because one of the things I see and I'm really grateful for, especially in the internet space, you model so well, like taking breaks and not being completely subjected to being creative. Right? That's something I see you model often, where you'll say, taking a break, y'all. And you communicate it, but it's like, I'm taking a break. I'm good be off here for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, taking a break. Because I feel like we have a very content is king culture, right? Content is royal. It's like you gotta churn it out, you gotta keep going, you gotta create, drop, release. And you're like, no, I'm gonna take a break. Right? And even like what you're saying, like you're taking space to grieve, and that's like really important. And I'm wondering like what inspires you to take that stance, to that position, or what has been a guiding principle or experience for you in maintaining that posture, because that is it's encouraging to see you model that. And I've taken notes for real. But yeah, I'm curious as to what informs that position.
Oh yeah. Again, kind of like similar to what I was saying about me creating Black creatives in response to other things. Kind of similar. Just working these jobs and getting like so burned out to the point to where I felt like I just didn't want to do or be anything else. And I think maybe the third or fourth time I kind of hit that wall, I just was like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to do this, because it had got to a point where like stuff was happening, like big stuff would happen, and I didn't have the capacity to enjoy or celebrate anything. Like something would happen and I would be worried. And last year, it just really hit home for me, especially with the Billboard, because right when the pandemic hit, for me, that like first like month or so of solitude really opened up and unlocked a lot of shit that I had just completely just repressed. The stuff, and I definitely won't go into detail, but the stuff that I uncovered for me was so big that I had no choice but to sit down somewhere and to take care of myself. And I spent probably, even with the billboards, because there was that one we talked, the one you just mentioned in LA, and then there was one too here in Chicago at the same time. But I was at a point where, again, a bunch of stuff had repressed stuff had came up, and I had been in therapy and kind of working through it. So when like those billboards hit, like, yo, those were hit the first time. They were like really big moments, but it was a really dark time for me. And a lot of people probably don't even know that, because I never really like shared anything. But like having that type of visibility while I was kind of going through what I was working through really humbled me and really like, it just put me in a position where I had to slow down, and I had to really take a break. And once I had gotten to this space of where I was like really working through stuff, and when I got towards kind of out of the summer and towards the fall, I started to see like, oh damn, I wouldn't have been able to continue to do anything had I not taken a break. And so a lot of that just comes from really personal experience, me being so burned out and so broken that I can't really just enjoy anything. So it's almost like when I'm like using the internet to tell people to take a break, it's almost me being like, yo, please, if take a break before life forces you to take a break, because that's a different type of energy. So that, for me, that's where it comes from. And then also just especially realizing within this past year, I think a lot of us have really, we talk about being woke, but I feel like there's a commercialized woke, right? And then there's a like, when you're literally like inside of your soul waking up, when you start to really see a lot of this shit for what it is, especially with the way racism and oppression in our country just really sets us up to fail, you're not okay. Like you're not okay. It's not cute no more. It's not fun. Like the shit hurts. And what I realized recently, after just kind of having my own moments, I asked someone, I was like, yo, how do Black people become radicalized and not lose their damn minds? Like, how do they not lose their shit? Like,
oh Lord,
wake up and really see the shit for what it is. And this woman told me that it just comes down to, she said for her, radicalism comes down to love. And she was saying because, and I'm butchering it, so I definitely don't want to say her name because I'm fucking up what she was telling me. But she was basically saying like for her, radicalism comes down to love, and that we are the people who are radicalized are the most hopeful and the most truthful. And that's when it clicked for me. I'm like, wow, so we have to take care of ourselves, because if you're a Black person in this country, 9 times out of 10, you done been through some shit. And if you don't take care of yourself internally, just with what you've already gone through with just life, period, if you don't take care of that and it comes up against all of the racism and oppression, you're going to definitely lose your shit, And I was able, once I had that realization, I was like, okay, I can see why so many of us, and I just use myself and like my family as an example, have had issues with addiction and, incarceration and things like that, because life is already hard enough, and having to heal from just life, period, on top of institutionalized racism and oppression, we wouldn't exist. So it's like we have to take a break. We have to take care of ourselves if we feel like we're going to be able to sustain ourselves in this world we live in. So I just, learned the hard way of what it looks like to not take care of yourself and to push through things. And so that's why I preach that and preach that a lot through hashtag Black Creatives. I lived it, and it's not a good life. It's not a good life at all.
Yeah, that burnout on top of, I've been calling it lately, seeing the Matrix.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of folks started taking that red pill, and it's like, okay, hold up now. What's going on here? Like, is that deep? Is that real? I almost think about it too. Like when you ask, how do folks essentially see the Matrix and not just go crazy? And I think I don't know if I'm big on like Marvel movies, right? And the Avengers movie where Bruce Banner, who turns into the Hulk, they were like, I think it's time for you to get angry, Bruce. And he's like, here's the secret. I'm always angry. The secret is that I can actually control it. This radicalized love is so beautiful to me, because a lot of times we think of love as looking one way, or we think of radicalization as looking one way, but it's so much more expansive than that, and we have so much capacity for it, which I'm thrilled by. I'm also confused by it, because like you was like, how are folks doing this? Like how how are folks okay? How are folks still, creating things? How are folks still being jubilant and finding joy? How is that a thing? It's trippy. You hit that on the head right there.
It's super tricky.
Sheesh. Especially we talk about burnout, and I think about content and the pros and cons of it, because on one hand, a lot of us have this outlet to be creative, to express ourselves, and a lot of it comes out artistically and rhythmically and beautifully, and different iterations of the expression. But then we're in this world where now we can like make money off of it, or people will pay attention to us because of it. And I'm just like, what are the pros and cons of that? Like that's another tricky thing when it comes to being expressive, or being expressive for a particular goal, or being creative for a particular, like a job, right? Like there's different entry points here. I'm just like, what are the pros and cons of that, especially right now, because our expression serves so many purposes, internal and external. So I'm like, what do you see? Where are you at on that spectrum?
Yeah. Oof. I'm always a big proponent of doing whatever works for you. At the time, I think that's something that one of the things that I also try to push heavily through Black creatives is that like nobody knows you better than yourself. And to your point, yeah, like that expression piece is so important. But at the same time, like one of the cons of that is that I feel like it doesn't make any space for reality. Like I had a friend of mine text me the other day, like, yeah, ambition is good, but what's the reality of what's going on right now? And I feel like the cons, there's so many pros to it, but there's so many cons. And I think the cons of where we are at this time in regards to content creation is that because there's so much happening and we're all on the internet, it's a shit show right now. It's like content 24/7. Like, I think about a lot how when we were kids, how whenever you used to leave the TV on, and after a certain time, there'd be nothing on TV, cut it off, like, that's done. Now we don't have that option. It's a 24/7 media cycle that we are trapped in. And that can get so draining to keep up with. And for the average person, the average creative, we're not Tyler Perry Studio. Well, I was gonna say Tyler Perry Studios. That maybe not be. We're not Marvel.
Right. Yeah.
Where we have this whole team and fleet of people working on our content. Most of the time, it's just us, doing what we can with our people.
Yeah.
And so I think like being able to just trying to push yourself to keep up with this for never-ending news cycle, I think is a con, right? I think it's just impossible, and it just doesn't leave any space. I also feel like for some odd reason, perfectionism too, for some reason, still runs like rampant. And one thing I learned about perfectionism, it's maybe like a couple weeks ago, this is still fresh, but really learning that like perfectionism doesn't really allow you any space or grace for yourself, let alone for other people, right? And trying to, create the perfect song or the perfect IG post or whatever so it can go viral. I don't think we just talk enough about how this is a pandemic and it's not normal, and to try to be like powering through it as if it is normal is actually insane. So I think those are some cons. Pros, I definitely always would just believe in the power of creativity. I feel like even when shit has been crazy or been insane, we've been at least able to find ways to like try to laugh at stuff. The whole like laugh to keep from crying thing is very evident on the internet because we do a lot of laughing to keep from crying. But I think the pros of it though is just to have that outlet. I think for some of us, even if we maybe aren't creating for profit or revenue or whatever, that we are creating just to have an outlet, right? And I think that's one of the most important parts of creativity that I think gets overlooked in this content crazy era. Like it can still just be used as a release and as an outlet. And that's one of the things that I feel like guys, once the billboard hit and I started to see people's like response to it, one thing I thought about was that like, our creativity too also should be for ourselves first, and it should be able to serve us and take care of us just as much as it takes care of other people. And so my hope is that like, for people who are constantly creating now, that I hope that that they also are giving something to themselves too. Because I think we missed that piece of it too,
Yeah, for sure. Because that that's like an authenticity to that creative process that I think a lot of us miss because content is so cyclical and it's so strategized. I'm actually curious. I mean, you were talking about reality a little bit just then, and that made me think about like authenticity, originality, and then like this relationship between like truth. You've talked about like the relationship between art and truth. I've read somewhere that you said something about art is truth, and I'm just like, yo, what out there? I mean, how do we discern that? Because I look at stuff, I'm like, is this art or is this a joke or is this what am I looking at? Like, what's going on here? Like like as an artist myself, I'm like, I don't know if this stuff is artistry. I feel like content doesn't necessarily mean it's art,
Art.
but I don't know that like that could be me being bougie. I don't know. So I'm like, what do you think? I'm like, you know.
I've seen. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I've seen a lot of conversation around lately, and I've been wondering, like, where did this come from all of a sudden? I'm sure it's probably always been there, but I've seen more of us kind of talk about the difference between art and content. And that's a really good question because that was something I was thinking about with Coming to America, sequel,
Yeah.
and how
Wait, for the listeners, I am proudly wearing a Randy Watson, a sexual chocolate, sexual chocolate world tour T-shirt right now that I got from my homie. And Melissa can't see the back of my shirt, but it's a world tour. The front of the shirt is Randy Watson, Sexual Chocolate, 1988 World Tour, but the back of it has only New York dates. I think is hilarious. It's like the rec center in Queens, the YMCA. But anyway, yeah, I just want to let the listeners in on this because I'm laughing so hard because I'm literally wearing Randy Watson right now. But yes, to your point, Coming to America, the sequel.
Yeah, and the first one, and I think a lot of us can agree, like the first one was a classic, right? Like that is art.
For
Like
sure.
that was art. That was like Eddie did the story. Like there was the story was connected. The visuals were there. The comedy was there. Coming to America too.
You wasn't feeling it, huh? You did hit the standard for you, huh? It just was it.
And I know it's kind of impossible to there's obviously no way that the first one can be outdone, right? But I think when I think about the differences between art versus content, I think the approach makes all of the difference. I feel like art is intentional and content is strategic. And art has more to do with, I feel like, being more so to do with like being led and being guided with what you're creating, as opposed with content, very strategical, very like hitting these specific goals and objectives. And it's not necessarily something that's created with a bigger purpose in mind. To me, that's what feels like the difference is. And I bring up Coming to America and the sequel because it really, to me, the sequel didn't feel as intentional as the first one. And I felt like I couldn't connect with the story. And like, yeah, it was good to see everybody. Glad James Earl Jones is still with us. Cool cameos and, a bunch of people. But it just didn't feel intentional. And I feel like that may be the biggest difference, at least to me anyway, between art versus content. And I know that like art is definitely like, what is it, like in the eye of the beholder, so everybody has their own what they call art and what's not art, and I get that, but I think too though, like that distinction is important, especially now because so much like content is created for the internet. Art is created for life. And I think art can definitely be shown through content, but I don't necessarily think content is necessarily art. We're moving now towards doing more like editorial content on Black creatives, and so I wouldn't necessarily call that art, but I know like the strategy behind what we put out through Black creatives is to legit amplify creatives and help creatives. So yeah, there's a strategy there, but I wouldn't call it art.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
No, that's a very good distinction where you say content is for the internet, art is for life. That's really helpful. It also strikes me that maybe sometimes some of us confuse the internet for life. which is another. I mean, I don't know what to call that. That's just something.
It's a fine line. It's a super fine line that has never been defined, and I think we, at some point, are gonna have to start defining that for ourselves. Because I feel like, one of the reasons now why so many of us, and when I say us, like us in our age range, I feel like so many of us are dealing with anxiety and depression is because we've seen so much change in such a short amount of time. Like the fact that we're old enough to still remember what life was like before cell phones. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is why, like, we're not old. We're not old people.
We're not.
The fact that we literally watched our technology and our world just change every 5 years coming up, like some big something, and it's just change and change and change. And so we may be like one of the last generations that can like sit in the middle of like before and after the internet.
What strikes me, like even in this moment, I'm thinking about how we were around when CDs were new. We saw when CDs came and then when they went. That's crazy. Isn't that wild?
That's so wild. And now we don't even use CD. Like I cannot tell you the last time I have picked up a CD.
A compact disc. Don't even make who moves compact discs on more? You know what I'm saying? Who's selling CDs? I don't know. It's wild. You're right. Our age range, the millennial folks as has been called, as we have been called, oh Lord. Right? Because you were born in the mid late 80s, early 90s. You have seen all of it. I mean,
yeah, it's wild. And to be this young and stuff is still changing.
yeah, because now we got NFTs and all this other bitcoins and blockchains. Yeah. Well, there's certainly been an evolution, like you just pointed out. Even like thinking about coming to America and the evolution of that story. I don't know if it's an evolution per se, but it's there's a period between its beginning and its continuation, and that will always be the case. I'm curious as to what is exciting you or what excites you about maybe forthcoming evolution of culture, Black culture. Like there's something coming still.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to what's exciting you about it.
Yeah.
The coming.
I think the ownership of it. I think at one point, I think we're coming out of that era where like we're surprised that people can make money off the internet, and we're past that like wave of like, wow, like this is happening because of the internet. Like now we are fully aware of the full range, I think, of possibilities of what can happen.
Yeah.
Just from the internet, from social media, or how things can be created or birthed or amplified from social media. So I'm really excited for this next phase of like, okay, well, now that we're aware, you know what I'm saying? Now that like it's not a novelty thing for someone to, go viral on the internet and then that lead into something else. I'm excited about how our ownership will evolve. And now that like, because I know, like we talk now a lot about trademarks and stuff like that, but like 5 years ago, wasn't nobody telling nobody to get a trademark or, you know what I'm saying? Like you better lawyer up. Like nobody was doing that, but I'm excited for that awareness now because I think then that gives us the opportunity to be like, okay, like how can we own this out the gate? So I'm excited to just see us owning more of our own spaces. And like when I say owning, not just like, oh, I created this. It's like, no, if you go look at the paperwork, like I'm here, like just seeing the evolution of Black business really evolve from all these different standpoints, because we've seen and I may have mentioned this in another interview, but just we've seen all these tragic ass stories, right? Of Black people who either get famous or get money, and then, you know, 10, 15 years later, you look up and so and so doesn't own this, or so and so got kicked out of this contract, or so and so is trying to, raise money to save whatever.
Mm.
I'm looking forward to seeing that narrative change to where, like, when we become successful and blow up, we can actually stay successful and be sustainable, right? And maybe, we won't maybe see some stuff change in our lifetime, but I'm really excited to see, like, that narrative change, that narrative of, like, Black people making it and then we burn out, or we get killed, or we end up dead broke, or just I'm looking forward to seeing, how all this awareness and insight and everything that we've learned, especially in this past decade, seeing how we can really solidify and set up stuff and own stuff in the future. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to us not having that sad ass Black artist or Black creative story anymore.
Oh man, yeah, that's really true. That's a really good point in terms of the evolution, because I feel that definitely for sure. That narrative shifting, and now we'll have to just not become the terrible people who did it to us before, right?
Exactly.
That's yeah, that's really good. That's really helpful. That's good. That's good vision. That's good vision right there. And it's also true to the space you provide, right? Because you're trying to not only just provide space for Black creatives, but like get folks paid. Like, how do we get folks paid and get folks positioned to be able to take care of themselves and get insurance? And because that's the stuff people don't be talking about, right? It's like when folks is entrepreneurs and creatives and freelancers, it's like we gotta eat. We need to be able to visit the doctor, the OBGYN. We got to be able to visit, dog. Like, what's up? You can't be. So that makes a lot of sense. That's your response. Thank you for that. That's actually really inspiring to think about too. And I'm like, because part of me is like, I'm trying to put my energy towards the folks and the stories that are doing that and changing my own mind about abundance and all of that. It's really important.
It's work. It takes work. It's possible. It takes work. So.
Mm, that's real. Melissa, I know we started the podcast, and again, condolences to you and your family for the recent loss, and for any listener who's experienced loss. I know a lot of us have experienced loss in the past year, especially. There's always loss, but it feels differently acute right now.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, this podcast, every conversation I've had, I've wanted to focus on not only the obvious and still should be named turmoil that folks have experienced, but also the joy. Because as the I don't know, the elder told you about radicalized love, it's important to have the capacity for all of these things. And joy is a huge part of what I think makes Black creativity so powerful and so special, especially resilient joy and joy that is counter to the real world circumstances that we endure. But I'm curious for you how you are experiencing joy these days. What does that look like for you these days?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. For me, what's been really helpful is staying in touch with my friends. I mean, obviously, like, everybody has to stay in touch virtually. Uh, but staying in touch with my friends, um, reminding my mom of like good times and memories and stuff like that has been helpful. Going to sleep. Because for a while, like, I wasn't, like, I was sleeping, but you know how you sleep, but then like you feel your body enter into a deeper sleep. For a while, my body wasn't coming down enough to enter into it. But like these past couple of days, I've been able to like get into it. I slept a lot today. But sleep has been really, really helpful. And just finding stuff to laugh at, listening to, you know, my favorite music. I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really like seeking anything new, but one thing that's been helpful is kind of going back and listening to stuff that I maybe like hadn't heard before, or hadn't heard in past, or had heard like in passing, but never like sat with. Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway got like a 1972 album. Yeah.
Ooh.
Going back and like, damn, like, and you know how like, come on, like obviously Roberta Flack, Donny Hathaway, like they're perfect anyway. Like to be an adult to listen to their stuff hits a lot different. So
yes.
With going back and listening to stuff like that, my best friend is helping me like learn how to prepare me to learn how to play like the piano. So just I'm a big reader. I love to read books. So people have been like throughout this time have been sending me books and stuff. So reading brings me a lot of joy. I've been trying to do that. Yeah, logging off of social media as much as possible, or as much as I need to. When my thumb I always like to joke, like people are like, oh, you see so much. I'm like, because my thumb is constantly going like this. I'm never trying to stop and look too long. But when I start to feel something go left on any platform, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna log out. I'm gonna log out, you know? And you gotta be careful. I think I've been finding a lot of joy in just really learning how to set boundaries and say no to stuff, or say, oh, I can't do this right now, and being okay with that, you know, because at one point in time, I just hated to say no to anything, and now I really love it. So I'm trying to enjoy that.
Saying no is like a superpower, you know. It's like when you get a superpower unlocked, you know what I'm saying? It's important piece of the skill set right there, the toolbox. It's important.
It's super important.
Oh man. Thank you for joining me and chopping it up with me for a little while.
So thank you for having me. It's been a minute, so I'm glad we got this time.
I know. Man. Yeah, to all the listeners, thank you for tuning in and for sticking around for this conversation. Melissa dropped a bunch of gems too. I'm gonna run this back and let me listen. Let me hear what she's saying about radicalized love. Let me see what she talking about. The content game. Yeah, it's good stuff. Thank you again. Thanks for the listeners, and until the next. It's been a minute. It's been crazy. 2020 didn't even exist. Was it a year? What happened? Did it exist? Sheesh.
Did it?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Stir Crazy. Don't forget to follow the podcast at Stir Crazy Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. On Twitter, you can find me at Stir Crazy Pod. This is a completely independent venture, so your subscriptions and donations are more than welcome. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/JP Reynolds. Thank you. Peace and power to you. See you next Tuesday.
Another plane, I don't do the basic. Another plane, I don't need to chase it.
Peace and power.
True.